Hello, Dominique Mounier. So for the sake of making the interview easier, I'll call you Dominique, if that's all right with you. We're going to talk a little bit, or actually quite a lot, I think, about the core of your profession. Up until now, we've made a lot of videos, but they didn't really talk about that. And now we're really going to talk about your profession. So my first question is, you are a geobiologist, right? I wrote it down so I wouldn't get the term wrong, so that's correct. You are a geobiologist.
Well, everyone thinks and says that I'm a geobiologist, but actually that's not the case. I created Geopractie.
And what's the difference between the...
First of all, it's a matter of profession, and at the same time, for me, it's a question of terminology. In the conferences I sometimes give, or when people ask me questions, I ask them what biology is. It's strange, isn't it? Everyone has the word on the tip of their tongue, but in fact, no one can give me the definition. So some people do manage to tell me it's the science of life. Yes, but that's very incomplete. Actually, biology, according to the definition in education, is the science of organic living things. So when we say organic living things, that means we start with bacteria, then move through the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, humanoids, and so on. In my job, I don't deal with that. I deal with concrete, rebar, cinder blocks, bricks, things like that, those kinds of materials. So geoterra, Angreic biology, if we really had to define what that is, it would be the science of the Earth's organic living things. So what does that correspond to? For me, it's earthworms, it's underground life, inside the earth, bacteria, earthworms, all those kinds of creatures. I don't deal with that. So there you go. Now, just to be clear, in geobiology, I'm not here to speak badly about geobiologists, not at all. There are certainly some who are very competent in their field. But for me, it's truly Geopractie because my professional work is mainly and primarily focused on the crucial harmonization, specifically the comprehensive harmonization of the extensive primary geomagnetic network. That's what my work is about. So I always try to take a very careful and scientific approach to these particular things. You see, sometimes I have clients who call me and ask me to come and clean their house. So I tell them, sure, I'll come with a broom and a mop. But actually, that's not what it's about. Others ask me to come and harmonize their house. Why not? Actually, no, it's about bringing things into alignment, exactly. Bringing the primary geomagnetic grid into alignment. That's it. In fact, what I do is, let's say, remove the interaction between the subsoil and the building. When people ask me to come heal their house or bring it into alignment, I tell them, yes, of course. But actually, that's not really what it is. Actually, no, what I do is heal the land that the house has ended up polluting. In fact, it's our infrastructures, which are everywhere, that actually reverse the geomagnetic currents and create, let's say, these problems. It's all about balance. That's it. All my work really is about making the building disappear from the land so that the land returns to its original untouched state before construction, which is how, in fact, the problems get resolved in this way.
So you mean that actually as soon as humans build something, they break something in nature and disrupt the energy circuits. Is that it?
Breaking isn't the right word. Let's say they create an inversion of the fields. We'll certainly talk about it one day. Later, about the work I've done on archaeological sites all over Egypt. We can come back to that question later. At Udopak in Bolivia, in Lebanon, everywhere, I was able to realize that, in fact, the ancient builders had this concept of science. That's it. They didn't build just any old way. The Romans had their own methods before constructing a building. The Greeks did too. Everyone had a way, let's say, of anticipating a construction. Unfortunately, our constructions nowadays are not even made according to the golden ratio. So in fact, we are disrupting what exists, the natural balance, because in the universe, in nature, everything is built and made according to the golden ratio. We're the only ones who don't respect the golden ratio. It's only us. Then there are interactions that can be related, let's say, to metals, like concrete slabs, whose reinforcements are not grounded before pouring the concrete. Most of the time, a toxic building is a cocktail of problems. It can come from a construction built over water sources, over veins, over faults. It can come from the construction itself, from the building shape wave as well. The shape wave, what is it? The definition, well, the way I define it, I take it the other way around, is a bit skewed. The shape of an object creates a wave. There are shapes that create a wave that doesn't correspond to our well-being. It's not more complicated than that. Then it can come from the neighborhood. For example, you have a neighbor who suddenly builds a colossal metal shed right next to your house. Or for instance, a railway line is built right in front of your house, not far away. In that case, there will be inversions of the geomagnetic field, which will subsequently cause toxicity in the building or the business. No matter what activity you do in that building is the same. There is a floor, walls, and a roof. No matter what you do inside, it's the same thing. It's no different.
Could you please tell me a little bit more about this fascinating geomagnetic field? I've heard about the Hartmann grid. Is there a connection? Are there any similarities? Is it the same thing? And what does it involve? What exactly is it?
It's true that for a considerably extended period of time now, I haven't referred to this specific energetic grid, which is commonly known as the Hartmann grid, by that particular designation anymore. That's just my own way. I called it the primary geomagnetic grid. Dr. Hartmann, in the 1930s, the German doctor and biologist, wanted us to remain attentive. I am absolutely not at all in favor of bringing this particular grid back into the prominent spotlight. It turns out, quite surprisingly, that he himself never actually asked for it to be specifically called the Hartmann grid at any point in time. Unfortunately, a lot of people need a guru, so they called it Hartmann. In fact, I used to call it the Hartmann grid. But the travels I've taken and the geomagnetic surveys, the two-scale plans I was able to make from these geomagnetic surveys of buildings, really and concretely showed that, in fact, our ancestors mastered this science better than I do, down to the millimeter, truly to the millimeter. So it was really something that was quite normal, almost certainly in the past. Especially in certain places, on some sites, even at Poku in Bolivia and also on Easter Island, I was able to take measurements where the geomagnetic results are truly incredibly precise. That's it. That's why I changed the name, and now I call it the primary geomagnetic grid. Why primary? Because in fact, after 30 years, I was able to notice that when it was regulated, the other grids would regulate themselves as well. So actually, it's the foundation, and the whole thing is the foundation, it's the base.
How exactly did you get to this particular point at this moment in time? Is it a long story?
Yes, but we'll keep it short. It's a question I get asked often, even during conferences or by clients. Well, I never really thought I would end up doing this one day, honestly. I was planning on going into music, into the arts, like being a puppeteer, a pianist. I did theater, all those kinds of things. Then I took up a trade so I could make a living. I was never someone who had a lot of money coming in throughout my life. And that was my family background. My grandmother, I come from a peasant background. Peasant, I didn't say farmer, I said peasant because that's an honorable word for me. Maybe peasant, as in a small hillside peasant. That's it, we diligently grew delicious hillside fruits. And people would often come to respectfully see my beloved grandmother in the fertile fields because she possessed the remarkable ability to miraculously stop painful burns. She could effectively lift the ominous evil eye. She could gently ease the suffering and pain of various animals and so on with her extraordinary gifts. She held on to her aunt's traditions and she passed them on to me. She taught me what she did. But, well, we weren't the only ones doing that back then. Those things weren't important. At home, we would go see the bone setter, we would go see the healer, and that was it. We didn't make a big deal out of it. And then I stayed there, which didn't stop me from being interested in history, the ocean, and so on. And then some elderly gentlemen came into my life, each with his own specialty, and they decided to pass on their knowledge to me. One was specialized in the occult, the other was specialized in radiesthesia and radionics. And it was especially with him, with Claude Valette to be precise, during meals. In fact, I started from 2 sentences during a meal about an old technique, but it wasn't fully developed. I started from those 2 initial sentences. I had a sudden spark in my mind and truly thought that there was something quite significant and worthwhile digging into there. So I started with my father's house where he couldn't sleep, and it worked. He started sleeping, things got better. And then I kept going. I did the houses of friends, girlfriends, buddies, and I made mistakes too. So it was from my mistakes that I made discoveries and developed my working method. Quite simply, from my mistakes, just like that.
Could you talk a little bit about this working method, or is it?
No, I can't talk about it, that's for sure. So it actually consists of a particular kind of electrical grounding, but it's much more accurate to truly call it a sudden discharge, really. In fact, when I arrive at clients' places, whether it's a business or something else, I take toxicity measurements. And the toxicity I measure is that of negative electromagnetic currents. So, to put it simply, to explain the negative electric and electromagnetic currents, when you have two currents, north-south and east-west, that cross each other and their original directions are each reversed, okay. At the intersection, there's what we call, let's say, a kind of vortex.
Nodes, energetic nodes.
Yes, you can call it that too, but we can also talk about an electromagnetic vortex, In fact, when there's a reversal of these two lines, the rotation of the vortex also reverses and simply creates this negative current. You just have to realign the lines in the direction they should be so that this vortex, let's say, turns the right way and there are no more toxic emanations. So what I intended to convey is that some people have raised the concept of the Hartmann grid, which is a concept in geomancy, the geomagnetic grid, which refers to the Earth's natural energy lines and the primary grid, often considered a fundamental energetic matrix of the planet. Well, that's already something I'd like to see proven. I can come with my measuring devices for starters. I don't believe it. Sorry for them, but I don't believe it. I'll believe the opposite if proven. But then it's not desirable. Why? This primary geomagnetic grid, in fact, nourishes us at the level of our physical constitution. In fact, if it no longer existed, I suppose we would revert to a gaseous state. We would no longer have any physical constitution. So, from what I know, NASA has understood this problem, or even the Russians as well, and have installed, let's say, because we know, a device in space stations, etc., that, let's say, creates a wave that somewhat corresponds to the Earth's magnetic field. And we realize that when they come back after 6 months, they're tired, maybe they have a bit of calcification, things like that, but they're standing. Whereas before, in the 60s and 70s, when we saw them go into space and come back after a few days, they were on a stretcher and they experienced very rapid calcification. So something changed at that level. So to continue, this intricate and complex network is actually of absolutely vital importance for our overall health and well-being. And everything that follows from it, including financial matters afterward. That's it. When you live in a toxic house, actually, negative glass is a wave. It's an archetype that has no free will. So it settles into the house, into objects, and onto people. So when you leave your home, carrying this with you, you project it outside, which can unconsciously affect your interactions with others, changing the way they are with you. That's it. And you bring along, or you could call it bad luck, a kind of misfortune or just problems. It's something that's not healthy, that's toxic. It can even lead to more serious illnesses, certain types of cancer, lymphomas, multiple sclerosis, heart problems, and depression. That's it. When negative energy reaches high levels of toxicity, it can really cause serious, very serious problems.
Earlier, you mentioned devices that measure negative energy. Are these devices not available commercially? Did you build them yourself?
Well, yes and no. Personally, I use a dowsing rod. So a dowsing rod, specifically known as the Lecher antenna, actually, it's precisely named after Mr. Lecher, an eminent Austrian physicist who originally developed this highly specialized measuring antenna that I personally use, but I had to carefully adapt it for my own particular and unique work. Because actually, in my profession, what I developed, there was nothing that existed to allow me to work properly. So I have to make all my own tools so that they suit me. It's the same for the name Lecher. So the rods, you can't find them in stores. they will turn, yes, of course. But which is the right direction for them to turn? So actually, I make the rods myself, and they need to be calibrated to the person in order to give the right direction. That's the whole difficulty.
Would you really say that what you do is truly scientific?
Yes, even if we can't explain everything. I'll give you an example. I was invited to work on a house for Alice Eveline in the Paris region, well, in the neighboring department. And I arrive at the home of a gentleman, well dressed, of a certain age, with a strong presence. He's the one who called me, not the other way around. I have never called anyone to work on their house. So I find myself outside with him and I start taking measurements. And all of a sudden, he bursts out laughing. Well, he just keeps laughing and laughing. I thought to myself, well, what I'm doing must be making him laugh, but I didn't feel like he was making fun of me because you can sense those things. After a while, I said to him, listen, it seems like what I'm doing is really amusing you. He said to me, yes, sir, but don't take it personally. It's just me. I said, okay, I keep working, and he keeps laughing. After a while, though, it really got my attention. And I said, listen, you're laughing a lot. Could you tell me why? Yes, I'm laughing at myself because I'm a scientist. But I said, on the contrary, I personally prefer people who truly have their heads firmly on their shoulders, even those who are quite rational and sensible, rather than people who are completely overexcited and tend to believe absolutely everything. You see, he then said to me, I really have to admit it, it's quite true. All right, I said, okay. And I suggested that he use the antenna himself. At first he refused, but I insisted and he took it. And then without even needing any guidance, it worked perfectly for him right away. And at that point, he burst out laughing. Then I asked him, but you told me you're a scientist. What field of science are you in? He hesitated, and then he told me, I'm the president of a science university in Paris. There aren't that many. There's the École des Mines, there's X, there's F, that's about it. So I asked him which one it was. He didn't want to tell me, so I respected that. And after a considerable while, I eventually said to him, listen very carefully, what exactly do you actually observe in this particular situation? Really, I truly wanted to know. And I said to him, well, now you can talk about it with your colleagues, etc. He said, absolutely not. And I asked why? Because if I talk about it, my career is over. That's it, that's all. It's over. It's a bit like the story of the professor at the quarter. The greatest physicist we've ever had in France is Professor Ockart. As soon as he started studying the radix and its tens in his laboratory, even though he was supposed to win the Nobel Prize in physics, the entire scientific community, both in France and around the world, turned their backs on him. Yet since the dawn of time, we've had dowsers all over the planet who point out places. That's where you need to dig a well. That's where you have to dig, even in the middle of the desert, in the rock. So that's where the problem lies. That's where the problem is.
Could you perhaps kindly tell me in just a few concise words what the fundamental purpose of geopraxy actually is?
Well, it all depends on what aspect of usefulness you're referring to. If it's, let's say, for personal use, for a villa, for a house, which is what a large part of my work and my clients are about, or if it's, say, for an industry or a business or buildings like that. So if it's for a house, if it's for health, it's to make sure the house itself is no longer causing harm. There you go, so that it isn't, let's say, a source of harm to our health. So what can be caused by negative energy, as I mentioned a little while ago, are serious illnesses, but also depression, children who become unruly and stop doing well in school. These are phenomena we see, as well as people who have poor sleep. Then we also have the phenomenon of joint pain, most of the time linked to underground sources, that's water. And then there's everything related to businesses. So businesses, and where there are businesses, there are employees. There are employees, there's a bad atmosphere, there are recurring delays, people are always tired. So for example, you might initially hire a truly dynamic executive, someone who is theoretically brimming with energy and innovative ideas, or perhaps a highly effective salesperson. You place them in an office, and for a period they perform quite well, demonstrating their capabilities. However, after a relatively short period, perhaps just a month or so, they start to fade gradually, becoming noticeably less effective and productive over time. After 2 months, they're lethargic, they've lost the will to act. You also see this in buildings, in houses. People buy them, people buy houses, and suddenly, as the months go by, they no longer feel like themselves. And that's what it's like to be imprisoned in your own home. They don't move anymore, they don't start anything new, as if they've lost the will to act. It's the same for employees. So someone who was once a very good manager, a very good salesperson, ends up becoming ineffective. And then you have employees or businesses that aren't doing well either. Afterwards, I have plenty of examples I could give from what I've seen. One particularly terrible example happened to me a long time ago now. I was called by a very, very large company. I've never mentioned it to my clients. The big boss. This was a national company that advertises on TV. The big boss had a woman who had been his right hand for years, who was more than just a colleague. She was a confidant he worked with. And he meticulously moves the entire headquarters into a brand new modern building. And then he carefully sets himself up in one spacious private office. And she is comfortably situated in the office right next door, adjacent to his own. 6 months later, she dies from a sudden aggressive brain tumor. So this already leaves him sad because she was someone he really appreciated. But there's also a bit of urgency to find someone new. So he receives a whole bunch of resumes, all at a high level because now it's 3 languages and so on. And he chooses a young woman, 28 years old, who fits the profile, and he sets her up in the same office. 6 months later, she also dies from a sudden aggressive brain tumor. And then this big boss calls me and says, I don't believe in anything, but I don't know why, deep down, I feel responsible for what happened. There's something inside me that, can you come over? So I arrive and I map out the building. Once the building is mapped, I do the volumes, but we can talk about that later. Obviously, there were a whole bunch of offices in that place. And I arrive at a spot, I don't want to say it, but as they say, where things happen. And there, I tell them, you see, this office here, it's just a storage office. No one should be working in there. It wasn't the fault of those in charge, but that's just how it was. You can have this kind of problem in companies.
Then when you actually go to someone's place, how exactly does a clearing intervention truly work? Maybe we'll get lost in the details, but how does it actually go?
So when I go to someone's place, well, first of all, they call me because there are problems. The question I often ask is, we're going to intervene. If people have bought a house, I ask for the history of the house to see if there have been divorces, heart problems, depression among previous owners, cancers. These are already clues, because people also call me when, after moving in, they suddenly tell me, with my partner, we're experiencing tension in the house. There's tension, we don't get along like we used to. There's tension, we're always on each other's case for no real reason, even though there's nothing to justify it. That's something that comes from the building itself. So when I arrive at people's homes, they're waiting for me, I say hello, and I start with that. No, more seriously, first I take a measurement, let's say, of the building's toxicity level. So sometimes a measurement has already been taken beforehand because, well, I do work around my area, of course, but I also work far away. I cover all of France, Europe. I even work as far as Australia, everywhere. So if we're not sure about the building's toxicity level, I suggest that people send me a dust sample from their home. And the dust, in fact, retains the memory of the negative glass level. So from there, I can, at home, check the negative glass level of the building to see if there's a need to intervene or not. And surprisingly, when I'm on site, I find the same measurement. So, well, it's very convenient. Just today, I received a letter with a bit of dust, a dust sample, which I'll analyze this evening for the people. So once I've analyzed the negative glass level of the building, people often ask me, yes, but where do the problems come from, etc. I tell them, in a way, collectively, where the problem comes from. Because we could spend the whole day making big speeches saying it comes from here, it comes from there, from here, from there, and so on. And then what do? So I focus my work on solutions. No matter the causes, what matters are the solutions. So I'm going to do a discharge. And well, if it so happens that it occurs within a house or perhaps a business establishment where I'm able to freely walk around the entire property, then I will certainly plant, but only in extremely specific and carefully chosen spots. It's within just a few square centimeters that I need to find, let's say, certain geomagnetic vortexes where I'm going to insert, for example, I was going to bring one here, a copper rod like this one. The measurement she's taking is not trivial. Everything is very, very precise. I had to develop these things myself. Why use copper? Because copper is an excellent conductor. It's the second best after silver, and gold, which is in third place, is not the best conductor, okay? And also, unlike iron, when it's in the ground, it won't break down, meaning that iron, after several years, will start to degrade and eventually disappear. That is, copper will turn green over time. But even after 50 million years, you'll still find it somewhere intact. So it's a guarantee, let's say, of durability and efficiency. That's it. So that's what I'm going to plant. Now, there are polarities. I'll place it one way or another, depending on what I feel, what the soil is asking for. But for that, it took me about 50 meters before I realized this phenomenon. It worked very well before, but doing it this way is more precise. That's it. So I'm going to put it in a vortex. Now, I want to point out that sometimes I hear people say to me, yes, someone told us we had a vortex in the house. And to that I reply, there is, but it's very serious. That's it. In fact, there are vortices, it's very simple. On about 5 square meters, you'll find 4 of them. There are millions of them covering the planet. They're everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And we walk on them, of course, we live with them. Moreover, to return to the primary geomagnetic grid and its usefulness, you should know that insects, especially bees, migratory birds and so on, navigate using the lines of the primary geomagnetic grid to return to their hives or to migrate to other countries. Birds, insects and various animals often use, let's say, this intricate grid because they can inherently sense it. Perhaps we will talk more about these fascinating animals, our cherished companions, our loyal friends, later.
This copper, Dominique, is it a type of copper that anyone can find at the hardware store, or is it something specific?
Well, not really. This is copper made for industry, used in the manufacturing of refrigerators, air conditioners, and so on. It has a greater thickness, a different quality. It's not really something you can just get. No, you have to order it. So these are special orders. So, to continue with the process, I do the stripping and I follow all the geomagnetic lines, north, south and east, west, because what you need to know is that the north-south lines, let's say, go in the direction of north. One goes north, the other south, so it's one on one side, one on the other, and the lines cross each other. And in the east-west direction, it's 2 times on one side, 2 times on the other, 2, 2, 2, east-west, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, north-south. So that's what makes things a little complicated. But then I hear people, maybe those who haven't been out in the field, who say the Hartmann grid measures this and that, 2.15 meters by 2.36 meters, I don't know. They've never actually been out in the field because in reality this grid is fluctuating. In fact, it's not straight. The higher you go in altitude, the more it narrows. I noticed this when I worked at 4,300 meters altitude. It got narrower. Then it will follow, let's say, the geological contours of the rock masses. So actually, you have the network. It doesn't touch itself, that's for sure, but it does get closer. The lines will get closer to each other or not. So, just to repeat, it's a vortex at your place. Be glad you have one, because there are dozens and dozens, and there are already some just as we're speaking. There are 4 here, 8, 16, 32, 64. There are some everywhere. And you just have to find the right ones to be able to work. So it's a difficult and dangerous profession. You can't escape it. For me, it cost me my thyroid, a triple thyroid carcinoma. I was a nuclear physician, and he asked me if I had ever worked at the core of a nuclear power plant. I never set foot there, never, but I still got sick.
How do you explain that? The illness that you have caught, it's primarily because you were exposed to something harmful.
So when I worked on a building, not all of them, strangely enough, when I worked on a building, I would somehow absorb some kind of charge from the building. That is to say, when I install the load shedder, the line suddenly reverses direction. Who is holding the load shedder? It's me. So it's you saying, I'm chaos, there are fakes, I'm chaos. By the way, there are side effects, even for the clients. I warn them in advance about the side effects. They might experience migraines, nausea, dizziness, or even sudden blackouts. Afterwards, there can be other side effects as well. For example, I've had people who suddenly find themselves for an entire day completely locked up in all their joints, like Robocop. They're stuck, but it passes. Then I have people who are completely exhausted and others who get irritated. Well, side effects don't happen all the time. Then I get some very peculiar side effects, like strange smells in the buildings after I've been there. It's more rare, but sometimes there's a smell of sulfur or rotten eggs, or even a stench like something dead, and even the smell of excrement. It's happened before. It can last anywhere from 2 hours to 5 days. You can open the windows, but it won't make a difference. But that's fine with me. Much more rarely, much more rarely. Each time it happened 5 to 8 hours after I left. A terrible boom, a terrible explosion in the buildings, as if lightning struck inside. Some people saw a metallic blue streaked electric arc. There's no danger at all. But for your ears, it's quite a shock. It's like a loud thunder in a certain way. Now, to finish with the side effects, you can have, I've only had 2 cases in my entire career, 2 people who were completely panicked and called it that themselves. One case was in the Alps, the other on the border between Drôme and Ardèche. They heard explosions, major blasts, deep beneath the buildings, and not just one, but several. And the houses shook slightly. It wasn't an earthquake, there wasn't a strong magnitude, but there was no damage. We agree on that, but they were scared. It only happened twice.
All of the phenomena you are describing, these particular side effects, is it during that specific load shedding period you mentioned?
Absolutely.
Can it last? Can it vary? Is it immediate? How does it happen?
I don't know how it happens. I haven't found a calculation system that allows me to tell people this or that will happen to you. I can't quite put my finger on it. I warn them, it can happen. No need to worry. But I can't quite put my finger on it. It's like load shedding. I tell myself, I bring the house up to code, and then there's a period of load shedding. Most of them ask me, but like, is it going to last? Then I tell them that's not. I don't have a calculation system that allows me to figure it out because I can't quite put my finger on it. It can be from 1 day to 6 months. If it takes a day, it's done. What about 2 days? It's done. What about 3 weeks? But it gets done. But the period, how long does it last? I can't say. There needs to be a period.
There's an element of mystery.
Absolutely. For now, I can only truly hope that one day science will, because right now we are indeed facing a significant public health issue with geopractice. We need to understand the awareness of this phenomenon for our health, for the lives of our businesses, our children. Basically, we need to realize that this phenomenon is important and that it's vital. Now, we build any which way. So, to finish, how does the intervention work? Once I've finished the unloading, I come back inside. I take the measurements again, and if they're good, we continue. At that point, I define the volumes of the building. Volumes, actually, when we talk about volumes, it's length, width, height. All right, that's what a volume is. It's 3-dimensional. There are 3 types of volumes. 60% of the volumes are neutral. You can do whatever you want in those. But then there are the remaining 40%. There are 20% generating volumes and 20% absorbing volumes. It's a bit like an electrical outlet, if you will, and that we can't change. Because it's part of the balance of nature. For example, when beekeepers ask me where not to place hives in the fields, I show them which areas are absorbing volumes, where the bees shouldn't be placed. It's as simple as that. The same goes for us. In the sense that the most important places in a building are where we sleep, where we eat, where we relax. The living room, the couch, whatever it may be, and the office. Then the hallways, the utility rooms, the toilets, etc. These are just passageways, except for the toilets. Unless you have severe constipation and end up spending a lot of time there, but that's never really the case. So I'm not going to swap out toilets or people, but I'm mainly going to focus on the primary bedrooms, the comfortable living room, the spacious dining table area, and the functional offices. But I can only truly do that once the thorough clearing out process is completely done, so that for a good 10 years there's a proper, well-organized setup, but above all, clear and precise lines that are accurate for defining the distinct spaces. You absolutely cannot go into a house to properly define its spaces if everything within it is proportioned in a way that is entirely allergic, geomagnetically speaking. It's simply not possible to do so.
I completely understand your explanation. Ideally, before embarking on the significant endeavor of building a new house, it would be most beneficial to have you come in and thoroughly assess the site, perhaps to say, we can certainly work here, but we should definitely avoid building over there, and maybe even, if it becomes absolutely necessary, to help thoughtfully orient the various rooms. I don't know if the precise orientation truly matters in the grand scheme of things.
Yes, orientation is absolutely crucial. I was able to see for myself in Egypt on site, not at the Great Pyramid, but actually at Dendera, where very few people go. Everyone visits the temple, which is magnificent, but I was really drawn to a very strange building, a bit more secluded. And there I found an incredible orientation measurement, and I felt extremely good both around it and inside. So the positions of bed headboards are very important. In the past, when people built farms or any kind of house, even here, everywhere, they would always place the headboards of beds facing north or east or northeast. Ideally, when building a house, it should be set slightly askew in relation to magnetic south, because actually it's not north that's magnetic, it's south. And in fact, the sun will be able to light up every part of the house at some point during the day. So that's pretty interesting. There you go. Of course, the positions of bed frames are important, as long as they are in neutral or generating spaces and not in absorbent ones. So obviously, yes, sometimes I prepare a plot of land before construction, indicating to the architects and then to the builders, let's say the project manager, the placement of the building to within a meter on the plot to one side or the other in order to achieve the desired result. And then there's the finishing work, once the house has been completed. Yes, that's it. Yes, it's very important. But unfortunately, I deal with buildings that are already constructed. It's set in stone. I have to adapt to what already exists. And to finish with the intervention, when the intricate work is completely done, I carefully engrave a distinctive plaque. This particular plaque is a unique and personalized label that is exclusively mine. When I make this plaque, there is what you see and what you don't see. However, it's a secret. I only tell my clients about it once I've finished. Only my clients know what they are for.
What specific types of buildings and structures do you typically work on and specialize in?
So, when it comes to the buildings I've worked on in stone cutting, I wonder what I haven't worked on by now. Well, I go everywhere in the world, to Australia, here and there, etc. Obviously, I do houses for private individuals, but I also work for businesses and industries. Large retailers as well. I work for them, but I never mention any of my clients' names. I've worked for international companies in high-end jewelry, things like that. I've also worked on brownstone buildings. I really enjoy doing. I've worked on champagne cellars as well, or even where the wine changes. The quality of the wine improves. That's what they told me. So, I make champagne cellars. I've built some by the water and others elsewhere. I work on products and at the same time on improving those products. Because all of these particular products contain a very significant amount of water, and water, as we know, is an incredibly powerful and effective receptor. So it acts on the water. So those are the buildings I make. I've successfully built various industrial buildings, but also, more specifically, cutting-edge advanced industry facilities. That's precisely it, in a nutshell. After that, I worked on airline companies. I've done a lot of bakeries, strangely enough. Bakeries all crafted meticulously by hand. Yes, I have indeed worked extensively with professional beauticians. Why, I don't know, a lot of beauticians. Then some rather unusual buildings. I've worked for some funeral groups. I've also built crematoriums. Just as an anecdote, I personally built what became the second or even the third largest brothel establishment in all of Spain. That's precisely it. There were, in fact, a considerable number of lovely ladies who, let's just say, very willingly offered their valuable services to the clientele. I didn't take part in everything at once, not at all. If it was done in a professional manner, let me clarify.
Earlier, when you talked to us about houses, you explained that you primarily worked on the exteriors of these residential properties. But when you're in an apartment building, for example, how exactly do you manage to do it?
Good question. That's true. Yes, for years I could only work from the outside. And so when I had to deal with apartments in the city or shops, I couldn't drill into the floors. So I was completely crazy when I didn't wait between thousands and 2 hours. And there were times when I drilled into sidewalks. Right in the center of Toulouse, it was crazy. But when I think about it, the sky must have been watching over me because I could have hit a gas, water, or electricity line. So I had to think and come up with a system that would allow me not to do that, but still get the same results, the same effects, as if it were outside. I got help from a design office that works as a subcontractor for the aircraft manufacturer Airbus, which is in my region, and they really helped me. And I went through different stages over 10 years of development until the moment when I was able to find the solution. So the solution, I'm going to show it to you because I anticipated the question. And since I had brought the first delay device, I brought him the rest as well. So actually it's about 7 copper tubes like these, which I make in my workshop. Each tube has a precise measurement, and above all, I don't skimp on the polarities between the tubes, so it's a whole setup to assemble. It doesn't just happen like that. It's not just gluing things together and then it's done. Not at all. And this is threaded, let's say, into a plastic shell that I had specially made for this purpose. And it's fixed to the ceiling, and here there's a little cap that covers the back, so to speak, of the system. And it's installed with an infrared sensor. So I wasn't able to create something smaller. This is the smallest possible size I can achieve. So it really looks like those mini Saturday detectors, but I truly cannot do otherwise. So that's the precise method I consistently use when I'm in an apartment building or a business establishment in the bustling city where I absolutely cannot drill into the floors at all.
Thank you. So I still had a quick question because we talked about it a bit off camera, but he mentioned to me before we started this interview some anecdotes about animals and vegetation. Is it possible to talk about that? Of course.
So throughout my entire professional career, what I have truly enjoyed most is consistently working in various environments and places where animals genuinely live and thrive, specifically on bustling farms in well-maintained stables, on charming goat farms, on expansive sheep farms, and on large productive cattle farms, among others. I love animals so much that it's a real pleasure because these creatures suffer in places where they shouldn't be, if they were in the wild, obviously. And these animals are forced to comply, even though these creatures are much more sensitive than we are to these geomagnetic influences. You should know that bees, which are insects and migratory birds, when they return to their hives or migrate to other countries, follow geomagnetic lines, and this has been proven by science. I'm not making this up, it's scientifically established, scientifically proven. So these lines, these primary geomagnetic networks, have had an immense influence on animals. And when I arrive in these places, I'm a humble country person, so I automatically feel at home. The smell of manure, the flowers, for me, I'm happy there. And what's striking is that the animals sense what I'm going to do. They're curious, they come toward me. Cows are very amusing because, in fact, they're very curious. So they come, they approach, they stare at me for a long time without moving, their eyes fixed. And as I move forward, some of them come to sniff the holes I've just made where I've placed the unloaders, quite simply. So raising animals, whatever kind they are, is a pleasure for me. Am I eager to say that I enjoy doing this more than building homes for people, for human beings? In a way, yes. I even have people I visit who have female or male dogs that aren't used to seeing people or that are a bit wild, and they're always very surprised that these animals come up to me, rub against me. They know they're very intelligent, that's it. They're very, very intelligent. Now, if you'd like a few anecdotes about the effects on animals, I'll give you some examples. For example, let's say you have a farm with 300 cows, for instance. They have a lot of cells, what they call cells. These are bacteria, so the milk is devalued. Or there's less milk produced, the cows don't come to stabilize. You have to push them. So, all of a sudden, 2 or 3 days later, not even, the farmer calls me and says, listen, I'm producing 1,200 liters more milk per day, for example. A cubic meter or two, that's how much, a cubic meter or two. But the cows come, they're calm, that's it. For example, I had plenty of examples, but another one was in the far end of Lot-et-Garonne, near the Landes. A farmer called me, same thing. He had a serious problem with ses bovins for a long time. In fact, every evening the animals had to be brought in. They had to go to the far end of the fields and push them to get them to come in. They didn't want to come in, but every evening with a few taps of the stick, they managed to get them in, even if they didn't want to. And then they called me the very next day. They didn't understand. With his son, they went to look for the cows in the field as usual. They didn't find them. And at 5 or 6 in the morning, they had come back on their own. They were already in the barn. Another example, then there are the horses, the mares that don't foal, for instance, that get sorted out. I also remember a farm where later on there were goats from a farmer who wanted to switch to making goat cheese. They built a shed, a metal shelter, of course, plus a lab up to standards to make the cheese. And they buy 5 to 20 goats at once. A truck arrives with a semi-trailer or something like that. And 5 to 20 goats arrive at the goat barn. These goats for several days didn't lie down, wouldn't lie down. They kept moving around and 4 of them died. They trampled each other to death, which doesn't make sense. So they asked me to step in. The animals, the goats were nearby eating. So I work on the goat barn, they come back and they lie down. There's no placebo effect with animals, and that's what I like about them. With humans there can be questions and so on and so forth. Yes, but why and so on, psychology, the mind, all that stuff, etc. With animals, no, it's yes or no. But we know it, and that's what I love. As for plants, yes, there is a very clear and noticeable effect on them, especially on various crops, or the plants growing around residential houses, or even trees that are not doing particularly well. All of a sudden, you will observe them starting to grow much stronger and more vigorously. For example, it was near Aubagne, I think. There was a plot with a grapevine for table grapes. It was huge. This vine was lush, but it didn't produce anything. And then the following year, all of a sudden, they found themselves with so many grapes, they didn't know what to do with them anymore. Then when people ask me questions, for example, at conferences about which trees should be planted around a house, I always tell them first, stop with the conifers. They're not native. The problem with conifers is that they're green all year round, but there are several drawbacks. First, they acidify the soil. Second, their root system is small. If there are strong winds, they're the first to fall. I say the interesting trees you should plant on the south side of your house for the summer are lindens because they grow fairly quickly, are very resilient, and provide cool shade. And then it smells so good that you want to prune it. And it's mellifluous, it's buzzing with bees. But still, what are the most important trees to plant around your home? Honestly, it's fruit trees. Fruit trees. Cherry trees, apple trees, peach trees, all the fruit trees. First, they'll grow. They'll provide shade. Second, when they're in bloom, it's magnificent. Third, they're mellifluous. Bees love them. Then they'll give you fruit. It's just fantastic. Of course, you have to know after 10 years to prune and maintain them. But really, it's not hard to learn at all. At 7 or 8 years old, I knew how to scratch the trees and prune them. So if a little girl like me could do it, I don't see why an adult with some learning couldn't do it too. Anyone could do it. They can do it. Why deprive yourself of the joy of having little children climbing cherry trees and stuffing themselves with cherries? That's real happiness. I experienced it as a kid. I climbed cherry trees with my sister. We'd climb cherry trees and gorge ourselves. Well, we ended up with diarrhea. But at the same time, it was happiness. We were snacking, you know. It's sad to think that some children will never know that. For me, that's a real sadness. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Dominique, for the enthusiasm you shared with us about plants.
Yes.
I was very moved. It brought back childhood memories for me. I had one last question. I remember the first time we met, when I came into your office, there were pinned up plans. I asked you what it was. I understood that it was related to your profession, geopraxis. Practice, sorry. Actually, those were plans of certain pyramids in Egypt. Could you tell us more about that?
At one particular point in time, I genuinely wondered whether it would be incredibly interesting and truly insightful to embark on a journey to meticulously go and carefully take precise geomagnetic readings around various significant archaeological sites located throughout the world, and subsequently, from those detailed readings, to accurately and comprehensively map them to an appropriate and exact scale. To separate the geomagnetic lines that meet the standards from those that don't, and to see by overlaying them if that could reveal or explain anything. Yes, it does reveal things. It provides information about the subsoil, about what lies beneath buildings, about possibly hidden rooms, things like that. At this stage, these are things I haven't revealed to the general public. I'm waiting until I'm ready to do so. Also, I want to make it clear that I don't have the truth. I see plenty of people who claim things, who say that I hold the truth. I've always said that you shouldn't confuse truth and reality. Maybe one day we could make a video about that. Me, I don't have the truth. I have my own suppositions and I have my own personal truths, maybe too, based on that.
On observations? Yes, on
Observations. Afterwards, yes, it's true. I took measurements on Easter Island. I took measurements in Egypt at several sites. I took measurements at Olibar, at Baalbek. I took measurements at Molivis. It was at Pumapunku. And it's true that these measurements, these mappings reveal things. Even things as well regarding dolmens, menhirs, etc. Maybe I understood what they could have been used for. In Egypt, I was lucky enough to be able to stay for almost half an hour alone in the Great Pyramid, where I was able to take geomagnetic measurements of the upper chamber. That speaks volumes too. At Karnak, there's the foundation stone that was laid at the sacred boat in Karnak. It's believed that the entire temple covered nearly 120 hectares. That was the assumption. It's the archaeologists who believe that. So this stone, I believe I can say that in fact it is the foundation of everything, because it was placed with incredible precision with a generating volume, unlike another temple which has an absorbing volume. Surprisingly, one boat for loading, one boat for unloading. This stone block, more or less, is actually positioned in such a way that for me the construction of the entire rest of the temple was only done based on the placement of this stone. Later, I was able to observe in another site, I believe it was Abu Ghraib, right in the middle of the desert. So there, you need permits to go. You have to go in a group of 4 and so on. There is an archaeological site that for me is even more important than the Great Pyramid itself and everything else. This temple, there are temples that have collapsed, but they are made of alabaster, white alabaster, whereas the rest is built from granite, from limestone and so on. The intricate patterns of the detailed carvings that were meticulously made there are surprisingly indeed quite similar to what I personally observed at Pumapunku in Bolivia, specifically in terms of the remarkable sculptures and their distinctive designs. Then there is an orientation table that is very interesting. It is misaligned. It shows by its direction. This is the survey I did. You can locate, let's say, the ancient equator, what is called the tilted equator. For me, this site predates the Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid.
Contrary to what scientists say, is that right? No.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. But for me, it's fascinating because there is still a phenomenon with the Great Pyramid. The north-south axes are aligned with the magnetic level. No, exactly on point. Whereas at other sites, precisely, the axes are positioned in a very different way in terms of the directions that are supposed to be, let's say, ancient at the magnetic level. So for me, these are sites that predate the Great Pyramid. So this site in the desert, for me, is older than the Great Pyramid. I'm ready to discuss it. There you go. As I want to clarify again, I don't claim to have the truth. I don't claim to have the truth. I don't want to impose a truth. As I said, these are my observations. Afterwards, whatever you want, if I can provide, let's say, some food for thought, that's perfect. I don't claim to have the truth. There are only mysteries. It's a bit of a theological concept that we also find elsewhere. There's a difference between a secret and a mystery. A secret is invented by man. That's right. And what about mystery? Mystery, it's just there. It's up in the sky. You can go your whole life without having access to a secret because it's hidden from you, whereas mystery is open to everyone. But you have to make the journey. And it's a long journey, maybe a spiritual one, to reach the mystery and its unveiling, to the apocalypse of the mystery. Apocalypse means unveiling. It doesn't mean the end of the world or anything like that. What's this story about?
Thank you, Domi, for this conclusion. I'm not sure it's really a conclusion. In any case, I find it broadening. I think it's quite beautiful. Maybe a few last words for women to conclude.
So when I spoke about the critically important primary geomagnetic system, its intricate network and related infrastructure, from my professional perspective and extensive experience, I would genuinely like to emphasize and clearly state that perhaps it is indeed high time for the relevant governing bodies and authoritative organizations, not just within France, but truly in all countries and nations around the entire world, to fully and comprehensively realize that we are unequivocally facing a significant and pressing public health issue here, one that demands immediate and serious attention. There have been times when I've done an entire village street by street. So you can do entire cities street by street, through the streets and avenues and everything. We could fix everything. I truly think that we really, truly need to become acutely aware, and I must emphatically repeat this point, that the primary fundamental geomagnetic system is in fact a significant public health issue. That is to say, if everything were properly regulated, if the buildings were well constructed, if all these waves were regulated, human and animal health would be improved. There might be better social peace, maybe more justice, a sense of calm, fewer serious illnesses. I'm not saying this cures everything, that's not it at all. I've never said I was going to cure cancer. I don't cure cancer, but maybe I've managed to help people avoid it or avoid this kind of serious illness. It's possible to avoid them, at least in part, certain types. That's it. I have an example from the south of Haute-Garonne. I won't give the name of the small town. They built 10 houses. 4, 8, 5 on each side of a place that used to be a kind of swamp. There are 10 houses, they're all the same. 10 houses, 8 of them are the same shape. Because you could say it's just chance. Ask us the question. 10 houses, and in each house, in 8 out of 10, there's the same issue. There's clearly a significant construction problem here. That is for sure, absolutely. I am maybe calling for a collective awakening, a widespread realization of this issue. My dream would be to build a prison. I'm willing to do it for free. And then after a year, assess the results, see how things are going for the staff, and get a sense of how the inmates would behave. I was about to speak, but I have no answer. I'm ready. I'm ready to do it for free as a trial. Afterwards, the most important places that should be addressed are actually clinics. They're disasters from a geomagnetic standpoint. They're disasters. There you go. And to conclude this discussion, I'll share with you a very old and insightful Hindu saying, if you're persistently pursued by truly bad luck, perhaps it's time to completely change your house. I would personally add, even though the process of moving can often be quite a significant hassle, practical and effective solutions do indeed exist for these situations. It's that simple. That's it.
Thank you, Dominique, for sharing your knowledge, and maybe another time for our interview. With pleasure. Have a good evening.